Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and everyone understands that a major threat to Jewish continuity, what's threatening the Jewish future, is Jewish ignorance, which not only means a lack of knowledge, but misunderstandings of what Judaism is all about, not understanding or appreciating the genius of the Jewish tradition, its relevance, its beauty, the richness of Jewish thought, of Jewish values, and how the Jewish tradition provides a profound embrace of life and what it truly means to be a lovely and caring and compassionate human being. The real threat to the Jewish future is not anti-Semitism or the insidious and intellectually fraudulent BDS movement that not only seeks to delegitimize and destroy the state of Israel, but which actually seeks to delegitimize and destroy Jews. But the greatest threat to the Jewish future is Jewish ignorance and misunderstanding, which fuels Jewish apathy and disengagement and leads to corrosive assimilation. That's the real threat to the Jewish future. And the antidote? Education and experiences with bright, articulate, dynamic teachers who can open up a whole new appreciation and understanding of what Jewish life and the Jewish tradition and the grandeur of the Jewish journey is all about, who inspire Jewish awakening and an enthusiasm for all things Jewish. It's so simple. Education. But it's also so difficult, so elusive for the Jewish community to develop exciting and effective initiatives that truly offer wonderful opportunities for compelling Jewish learning. And there are a few. We hope JBS is among them. But one of the most effective, most exciting, most wonderful of all is a National Jewish Center for Learning known by the acronym CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, which was founded in 1974 by one of the most amazing rabbinic personalities and teachers of the 20th and 21st centuries, Irving Yitz Greenberg. The English language acronym CLAL is a play on the same Hebrew word, klal, which means entire, and is most well known in the phrase Klal Yisrael, expressing the idea of the entire people of Israel. It's a word conveying a wonderful sense of inclusion, embracing all of the Jewish community. And that was the heart of the ideology upon which CLAL was founded. An embrace of the entire Jewish people with a profound respect for all the streams of Jewish thought across the Jewish spectrum, the best of Jewish pluralism, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and any other Jewish movement that was part of Klal Yisrael's search for intelligent Jewish meaning and Jewish life. And through Klal, Yitz Greenberg attracted the most dynamic and charismatic and brilliant teachers and scholars who had the gift of being able to communicate in a most exciting manner the essence of Jewish tradition, Jewish peoplehood, and of the state of Israel. And one of those brilliant and dynamic and charismatic individuals who became an intimate part of CLAL's mission is an extraordinary rabbi who now serves as president of CLAL. It's my enormous pleasure to welcome to L'Chaim Brad Hirschfield, author, lecturer, and one of American Jewry's foremost commentators on religion, society, pop culture, who brings a marvelous perspective to spirituality, politics, social trends, on the overall American scene. Let me tell you a little bit about Brad Hirschfield and how he's making a special contribution to Jewish life today. Brad has a BA from the University of Chicago, was ordained by the Institute of Traditional Judaism, and has a master's from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, which of course is the academic institution of the conservative movement. In terms of Brad's rabbinic work and his teachings, which have been embraced by all America, Brad is co-founder and editor of the website The Wisdom Daily. He's seen on Newsmax TV, where he does 4 shows a week, and he conceived and has hosted 2 series for the American Muslim television network, Bridges TV. Brad writes a regular column for the Washington Post entitled For God's Sake, where he addresses issues and trends of the day. A recent column on gay marriage was entitled, I'm a rabbi who does not do same-sex marriages, but I celebrate today's ruling. Brad is also the author of the widely acclaimed book, You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right, Finding Faith Without Fanaticism. And he's edited a book of Holocaust testimonies entitled Remember for Life, and co-authored a Jewish guide to palliative care entitled Embracing Life and Facing Death, which is why Brad Hirschfield was recognized for 3 straight years by Newsweek magazine as one of the 50 most influential rabbis in America. Simply put, Brad Hirschfield is a superstar in the Jewish world, and it is such a thrill. It's a kick. I have wanted you at this table for so long. Thank you so much for joining me, Brad.
Thank you for having me. Look, you're a hero, and what you have done through JBS is amazing. I just fear a lot of the stuff about me was grossly exaggerated.
Not at all.
But everything else, your summary of CLAL and of our work was magnificent.
Thank you.
Your analysis of both the challenges and opportunities we have as American Jews, I think, is spot on. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's lovely to be sitting with you. Thank you. You're about to find out about it. Brad is also an extraordinarily lovely human being. I want to talk first about you and your personal journey, which I find so fascinating.
Okay.
I'll tell you what I know, then you fill in.
Sure.
So you were raised in Chicago.
Yeah, I grew up on the North Shore of Chicago.
In a secular Jewish family.
Yeah, I was passionately Jewish, but largely secular. Secular in the way that often so-called secular Israeli families are, which is interesting because I'm a 4th-generation American. So it had nothing to do with Israel, but that means passionately Jewish, day school from the age of 5, because Jewish learning, immersion in Hebrew culture, celebrating Shabbat. Food wasn't kosher, but celebrating Shabbat, very important to my parents. Synagogue, we stayed away from religiously.
But you had Shabbat in your home?
Absolutely.
What were your parents' names?
My father, who died 2.5 years ago, was Seymour Hirschfield. He not only was, but is an amazing man.
Yes.
And continues to be a presence and a teacher in my life. And my mom, Joanne, who is 83 years young and should remain in good health, spends her summers in Israel with my younger brother and studying at Pardes Institute. So I'm very blessed. My parents, truthfully, were my first 2 and remain 2 of my best teachers. So much of what I have accomplished, in fact, I would say virtually everything I have accomplished, exaggerated as you may be about it, is really not because of me. I have been blessed with remarkable teachers throughout the course of my life.
Brad, what did they teach you?
So I'll tell you 2 quick stories, and that really encapsulates it for me. For my father, it was his way of being Jewish and supporting an inclusive approach to being Jewish. So much so that my mom and dad were getting married. My father, who came from a more grounded, traditionally observant family than my mother, turned to her and said, look, Joanne, there are a couple of things that I think as we're going to do this, I'd like you to know about. 2 kind of rules for our home. The first is, I know you've always done this, but I'm just not a Christmas tree and wreath kind of guy. And I know that you do it. I know that your parents, all Jews, have done this. I don't see that in our home. And my mother looked at him and said, what's the other thing? Because I'm told she loved this tree. She said, well, look, I know we're not going to keep kosher because that's not what we do. But you know that I, my father speaking, don't eat pork or shellfish and don't mix milk and meat. And I'd like to observe those 2 rules in our home. When we go out, people should eat whatever they want. I'll choose what I choose, you choose what you choose, but that's our home. And my mother looked at him and said, Seymour, I love you like I could never love another man, but I don't think I'm ready to become Orthodox.
Which is what she associated his...
For her, if he had said, I want you to wear a wig and stockings with a seam running down the back like Hasidic women do, it would have been no different. For her, it was from another planet. Now, this is the same father with those norms who happily did buy us whatever we wanted growing up. And for me, growing up, that meant my favorite food was shrimp cocktail. And sitting at that table, wherever we were, whatever we ate, my father would quietly go like this, because he didn't wear a kippah, but this was his kippah, and would lead us in saying hamotzi. We said a blessing whenever we ate together, because though my father never articulated it this way, Jews can disagree about what's appropriate to be on their plate. But when you sit with your loved ones, that's a sacred moment. And our language for expressing the sacred are these words that come in Hebrew called brachot. And so rather than fight about what was on the plate, he simply taught us all to say a bracha before we ate. And that was an amazing thing, to see the holiness, to see the opportunity past the differences. And they're real differences. It's not like he ever ate the shrimp. But he saw there was some bigger frame that held us all together, and that Jewish could offer that frame.
That is a fabulous story.
So,
Incidentally, did your mother finally go along?
Much later, but I mean, like, I was in high school
Well, when
later.
you grew up, was there a Christmas tree in your home?
Oh, no, that we really didn't do, and there was no pork or shellfish. So yes, she went along with his request, but in her personal life, let's put it this way. Sundays when we would go out with my grandparents to Hokow on Randolph Street, the shrimp and lobster sauce came to the table quick and my mother was excited.
Okay.
She later adopted some of his practices, but even my grandparents were amazing because out of respect for my dad, though they thought these rules were completely nuts, they never put up a tree after my parents got married.
No kidding.
I was raised in a family that had a sense that traditions matter, but the people in front of you matter more than the ideology inside of you.
Boy, Brad, isn't that the essence of Judaism? It's all about people.
I mean, I think I would say it's yes and yes, because people without their traditions aren't going to go very far. But when traditions are disconnected from people, they're actually forms of idolatry. They're empty. One of the tragedies, I think, right now is we have a Jewish community where the people who understand that people are central often are alienated from those traditions.
Yes.
And the people who understand the traditions are really vital think that their way of understanding them is the only one that counts,
Yes.
and is more important than those other people.
Yes.
If we could bridge that gap, that's the real inclusivity of a CLAL or of any approach I think that's going to really make it, is really crucial. So my dad was an amazing teacher in that regard. My mom, it's a different kind of version, but knowing now who she was, you'll really appreciate this. I'm about 12 years old, and I knock on my parents' bedroom door one day. Oh, my mom was home. Come in. I said, Mom, I have to ask you a question. Can I ask? Of course, we can talk about anything, because in my house you did talk about everything, often at very high volumes. I said, look, could you get me a couple of dishes and a couple of sets of silverware and a couple pots and pans? And my mother looked at me and said, for what? Because, remember her background, she had no idea it was coming. I said, well, I've decided I want to keep strictly kosher, and so I can't use your utensils. And I'll eat vegetarian if you want, but if you're going to serve meat, you're going to have to find a kosher butcher too. My mother kind of leaned back and looked at me and said, so you need me to get some pots and pans, a couple of pieces of silverware, and I've got to find a kosher butcher shop if you're going to eat chicken with us on Friday night. I said, yeah, pretty much. I knew enough not to go into Pesach rules at that point. She thought about it and she said, no, I won't do that. And I said, what? What do you mean you won't do that? You send us to a day school. They were among the founders of the Solomon Schechter School in Chicago.
Conservative movement day school.
That's what they teach us. I'm actually taking it seriously. I asked you for help and you won't do that? She goes, right, I will not do that. And I was sputtering. I didn't know what to say. I was completely deflated. She said, but wait a second. I said, what? She said, here's what I will do. If you'll wait until the summer when you go off to camp, even though I don't know exactly what this means, I will call the rabbi and I will ask him to kosher our entire house. And I looked at her and said, you will? She said, yeah, that I'll do. I said, why? She looked at me and said, because in your own home, you don't eat off of different dishes.
Boy, this makes me cry. You
My
had a
mother,
fabulous mother.
no, they're amazing. By the way, no college degree from either one of them, because my father comes back from serving in the South Pacific, and school seemed small to him. And my mother just was not built that way, right? And so this wasn't, forget a theological education, there wasn't a lot of academic preparation, but remarkable intuition. What my mother understood, she didn't say it this way, but it was the teaching to me, was two things. Oh, and she added one other rule, I should add. She said, now, I do have one other thing, my now kosher-eating son, that you're going to have to do. And I said, what's that? Because you're going to kosher the house. I'm good. She said, well, I'm not. I said, so what do you want? She said, you're going to have to figure out with all of your rules how you'll still go out to dinner with your family. My mother, in one fell swoop, understood two things. That she would not allow fear of my newfound observance to come between us, that I would not be allowed to use that new observance as some kind of club to beat them up with, that suddenly I was a better Jew. And the truth is, that's what we did. She koshered the house that summer, and I started eating tomatoes in some of the nicest restaurants in North America.
Just a fabulous story, Brad.
Those are my parents.
Yeah.
They are amazing people.
Did you have a bar mitzvah ceremony?
Oh, yeah, sure, because that was American Jewish citizenship. We showed up at Shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur because you had to.
Okay, so it wasn't that you never
It
stepped foot
wasn't
in the synagogue.
No, and on your site, right, the anniversary of a death,
Okay.
my father would go to synagogue for
So
his
did
parents.
your family self-identify as conservative Jews?
You know, I would say they probably did, knowing full well that our version of it was not exactly
I understand.
rabbinically approved. The synagogue we belonged to was conservative.
And you became bar mitzvah in a conservative
Yeah,
synagogue?
absolutely.
Do you remember your bar mitzvah ceremony?
Oh, yeah, sure.
No, you said yes. It's not that present in memory.
Oh, no, it's present enough.
Was
I
it a
mean,
warm experience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it was a warm experience. Again, this is the key. Not because of the ceremony,
Right.
but because of the family.
Yes.
Right? I don't think you can look to institutions to provide what families can't provide. I think you have to look to institutions to give families the fuel, the tools, the skills, the capacities to build what they want to
Okay,
build.
so this is off topic. Very often, Jews think that the synagogue will make their kids Jewish. Are they right?
No. I'll be very clear. First of all, what they mean by make their kids Jewish is probably misguided, because it probably means I want my kid to be a kind of Jew that I myself don't want to be. So that's just rank hypocrisy.
Although I want to say it differently and see if you agree. Jews often want their children to know about Judaism in ways that they wish they did know.
So if they really have that desire, they should actively engage. And if they actively engage, I always tell families, parents are remarkable educators. I include myself, we teach our kids what we most believe, whether we like it or not.
All the time.
Whether we know it or not. The blank meter that children possess in watching their elders is finely tuned. They know who we are and what we're about.
Just as you did with your parents.
100%. By the way, when Yitz Greenberg, my teacher and founder of CLAL, finally met my parents, and this was a couple of years into my journey with him, and he spent a weekend in Chicago as a scholar in residence. He spends the weekend with my parents and then turns to them as they were driving him back to the airport. He says, I have to tell you the truth. I took a great deal of credit for who Brad is and how he's become, but I realize now most of it belongs to you. And he was right. Now, by the way, it does also belong to him, because he was one of the people, there's a list of others, who put legs intellectually under it, who actually opened up Torah in a way that allowed me to use it in line with my parents' intuition. So there's a role for institutions, don't get me wrong, but in the end, the very best of institutions, when they're working right, will be partners. They will be tool providers. They will be re-energizing centers. But if you don't need the fuel they have, then all the fuel in the world won't help. If your car runs on diesel, and think of a family as a kind of vehicle to get somewhere. By the way, that's part of it. You'd have to ask, where is our family going? Mm-hmm. Where is our Jewish going? What's the point of even having this vehicle called Jewish? We're so concerned everyone should have a Jewish vehicle. What, for what? Where are we going? Are we going someplace interesting? Are we going someplace that will make us better? Are we going someplace that will make the Jewish people better? Are we going someplace that will make the planet better? Because remember, we're a people with a very big dream. We did something remarkable, we Jews, that no one in antiquity had ever done before us. We begin the Jewish story not with Jews. Adam and Eve weren't Jewish. No one had ever done that in ancient times. Every other ancient story begins, let us tell you about our founder and prove our genetic superiority, why we and only we should be in charge. And then come these crazy people, the Jews, the Israelites, God, pick whatever theology you want. We're going to tell you our story not from the beginning of the Jews. We're going to tell you our story from the beginning of humanity. Because actually, the purpose of Jewish isn't about being Jewish. Jewish is a way of being human.
Say it again.
Jewish is not about being Jewish. Jewish is a way of being human.
Yes, Brad. And why don't we hear that all the time?
Because we're scared.
What?
We're scared.
What does that mean?
We're scared. I think we're scared in a couple of ways, some of which I'm sympathetic, if impatient with, some of which I'm just downright angry about.
Understand my question, then you tell me if it's about fear.
Yeah.
Why don't rabbis everywhere give your message that what Judaism is all about, whether you're a conservative rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, a Reform rabbi, Regis Drez's rabbi, whatever institution you have smicha or you're ordained from, why isn't your insight, which I feel is 100% right, why is it that something the Jewish community does not hear from every rabbi all the time?
I think we've confused the vehicles with the goal, right? Or to quote, go outside of Jewish, the Buddhist philosopher Thich Nhat Hanh, we confuse the raft with the beach. By the way, we need the rafts. We do need the vehicles. We do need the traditions. There's a reason that I daven 3 times a day. That's my vehicle. Might not be someone else's vehicle, but you better have some vehicles if you want to get anywhere. But we forget the point of the vehicle is not to have the vehicle. The point of the vehicle is to get somewhere. We are a people with a dream. Right? Martin Luther King didn't make up, I have a dream. By the way, he said it brilliantly. We're indebted to him because he's one of the great Rabbis, if not rabbis, of the 20th century. But we've been a people with a dream from the beginning of Genesis. And we forget that. I think part of it is there is fear. There was fear for the better part of 2,000 years because it wasn't so easy for Jews most of the time. And that's the part I'm sympathetic to. That I can still walk on a planet where there are people who can roll up their sleeves and show me their tattoos. I can't take that lightly. Right? But that is passing, and so I can't build Jewish off of that. After all, I grew up on the North Shore of Chicago, a 4th-generation American, a yeshiva boy who was trained to use weapons to defend my second home, then first home. There's no fear for me. So we can't build off of that fear. But I understand that we're the inheritors of generations of reasons to be fearful. And so I don't take that lightly. That said, we now have to make the turn. And it's a slow turn, because if you're afraid for the better part of 2,000 years, and you're only free for about 60, if this were a baseball game, we'd be in batting practice. The first inning hasn't even happened yet, which is why when we worry about the future, it's such a mistake, because we have no idea what's coming, but I promise you it's much better than most people who worry imagine. And by the way, that's always been the key to Jewish success. The other fear, I think, is we train people for Jewish leadership who don't have the kind of confidence they should in our capacity. Not the capacity of the tradition, however understood, but more importantly, not the capacity of people to actually pick up that tradition and use it in ways that will be profoundly life-affirming, that will add real meaning and value to people's lives. And by the way, not only to Jews' lives. Not only to Jews' lives. Imagine if we actually said, okay, how would this actually make a difference in someone's life? We did do that once upon a time. When we introduced Shabbat to the world, it was a fundamental claim that every person, by the way, it's why the commandment says it's not just Jews who have to rest on the Shabbat, it's our servants. Why? It's a claim about human dignity, because no one should be enslaved. Now, we can fight about the details of Shabbat, and we should, because they're interesting fights. And as someone who's pretty darn strict in my observance, I got a lot of rules. One of my kids once said to me, Abba, for someone who's so open to everyone, you've got a lot of rules for us. And it's true. But I have those rules because they are vehicles for me to attain the dream. What we would have to do is raise up a generation of leaders who are at least as good at articulating the dream as they are the rules of how to get there.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate what you're saying. I'm not satisfied yet.
Push.
So I want you to talk one more time.
Okay.
What you said is that the whole goal of Jewish is to help us be more human. Mm-hmm. And I say to you, Brad, I think what you have articulated is the essence of everything the Talmudic tradition, the rabbinic tradition teaches, and it comes out of our sense of Torah. But I don't hear it from rabbis as a rule. I hear rabbis talk an awful lot in very different language. Yeah. They're concerned about the welfare of the Jewish people, and they have every reason and right to. Maybe it's because of the fear. They talk a lot about God. You started with where I believe the Jewish tradition starts. And I'm not minimizing the presence of God in this at all. But the Jewish tradition is all about people. And you and I are meeting here, and you say spontaneously that the whole goal of Judaism is to make us more human, and it extends beyond the Jewish community, and you're right. And then I say to you, so how come I don't hear this? How come the people who are watching right now don't hear this everywhere they go from Jewish spiritual leaders? Address that for me.
So look, if I were satisfied with the state of the rabbinate, CLAL wouldn't have a major initiative called Rabbis Without Borders.
Correct.
But I want to be careful not to go into attack mode, not just because it's so easy, but because it actually would violate the premise to look for what's working and build on it. What I do think is a serious concern is if you talk to most people who enter the rabbinate, I don't care what denomination, they actually enter with this big vision. Almost everyone I asked who, tell me the story of why you went to rabbinical school. I'm not so unique. They all have stories that in some way or another about how Jewish fuels some kind of big journey that actually is towards something better, not just for them as Jews, but for them as people, and actually for the world.
Yes, but I think you're absolutely right. Then what happens?
So
what happens?
Unfortunately, too often, whatever the training is, rabbinical school becomes like sausage making. And it becomes some kind of homogenization process whose purpose is to create not someone who will serve anyone anywhere with whatever understanding of Torah they have, but who will recruit people to their understanding. In all candor, it's why I spent 10 years trying not to be a rabbi. I really didn't want to be a rabbi. In fact, how I ended up preparing for an academic career at JTS was because having spent years in yeshiva in Israel, and that version of Jewish didn't work as well for me. It was a far more extreme political vision. I lived as one of the founders of Yeshivat Shavei Chevron.
Yes, we'll get to
and
that.
We'll get
to that.
I still loved learning, and I wanted to spend my life learning Torah. So for me, to be a Jewish academic would allow me to spend my life studying Torah without what I saw all rabbis do. Now, it's not all. It's a blanket statement. I was 23 years old. I was full of you-know-what, but your point is still well taken. Too many rabbis are in sales. And I never thought that Torah was something you sell. Especially when the sales mode and the success model was, the more I can convince you to look like me, the bigger success I am. What I knew, from my ham-eating grandparents to my bracha but semi-kosher keeping father to the way I was living, was that it was not about sales, and the purpose of Torah was not to turn people into little versions of their teacher. The purpose of Torah was to give people the tools to become the people they most wanted to be.
Okay. I want to give you some thoughts of mine, and I want you to react. I think sometimes rabbis assume that congregants want something of them, and if there's a fear, another fear you have to mention is that every rabbi wants to be loved, by the way. Every one of us wants to be loved.
That's the key.
And sometimes we try to do what we think will make other people love us. And I think that there are rabbis who think their congregants expect them to be and to believe and to have a certain orientation. And then what you said, by the way, I've never heard anybody else say, and it's something I have thought my whole career as a rabbi. I saw it with my own eyes. Lovely people come into rabbinical school and leave different. Yeah. Not that they weren't lovely, by the way.
Right.
And incidentally, there are many fabulous rabbis.
Right.
Okay. But as a group and as a problem, what I see is that many of them have personal doubts, that if rabbis go out and talk together, many of them are very committed to the reality of a God in this universe, and many rabbis are still searching themselves, but they'll never tell their congregants about it. They'll never share that. And they believe almost in a Christian model, and this is not in any way to deprecate what the Christian model is, it's just a different model from ours. The Christian model is much more about religion, and the Jewish people are all about people and peoplehood, and how do you create community. And every individual then searches for God, and if that individual is lucky, Brad, somewhere along the line, an individual will begin to understand what the presence of the Shekhinah means walking at one's right hand. But in the meantime, it's all about being part of a community that's striving to make this world better, to improve the world. And I worry that there are rabbis who take not Judaism seriously, but themselves seriously. That's a huge failing.
Yeah.
And then they think that they have to stand for something because they're worried their congregation thinks that they have to stand for something. And I think they're wrong. And then you come here and you sit there, and in one sentence, you articulate not only the essence of CLAL, and it is what CLAL is about, not only your mother and your father and you, but I believe you represent and what you articulate. And why am I so thrilled to be sitting with you? And why have I been a huge fan of CLAL? And I knew Yitz Greenberg before you knew Yitz Greenberg.
I know.
And I am a disciple as well. I revere the man. I was fortunate enough to, by the way, to be on his first Jewish Studies faculty at CCNY when there was no Jewish Studies program in every university.
No.
He was the first to be. He was the head of the first Jewish Studies program on a university level, and lucky me, he asked me to teach his very first semester. Why do I love? Because in one moment you articulate what I wish every Jew embraced. And again, this is not an anti-God statement, but what it is a pro-Jewish insight that you articulate. That's my offer back to you.
So there's so much there that I agree with. I don't know where to start. I mean, just by biography, it's so interesting, you know this, that one of the turning points for Yitz was, as he would often say, is that after the Shoah, the job was to argue the legitimacy of God back into the picture, right? Again, less my issue because I didn't witness what he witnessed. And interestingly, because my family's here so long, I can't name one relative who was affected directly.
And that's a blessing.
Which I'm very grateful for, but I would always
it
listen
also
to say that.
changes your experience.
Right. That's why if I were driven by fear, it would be something to be ashamed of. No, really, I am the beneficiary of everything that is right and good about both the American Jewish experience and the Israeli Jewish experience. There's nothing I haven't been given. Nothing. There is so much that I have to be grateful for. To have any response to people and to this tradition other than mine would actually be an embarrassment. There's nothing I haven't been given by God, by life, by the world, by the state of Israel, by American Jewish experience. I mean, it's crazy how fortunate I am. But I think that's a whole separate thing. If we actually taught people how to take stock of what they have, as opposed to worry about what's missing, and I mean that demographically and Jewishly and humanly and psychologically, we would all be a lot happier. Also, you should know that my father only had the Jewish identity that he had because of Reconstructionist Judaism and the willingness of one of his teachers, Ira Eisenstein, Mordechai Kaplan's son-in-law, to take God off the table.
That's right.
And did it in a way that allowed my father to re-enter Jewish. My father comes back from serving in the South Pacific, and by the way, would never speak about it. When he was in deep dementia, he relived parts of it, and we heard. But he would never talk about it. Never talk about it. Or very cavalierly, he would talk about sitting in a tent. He was a master sergeant connected to the Marines. He was in the Army, though. And he would say, yes, as things quieted down in Okinawa, we would sit in our tent working, and every once in a while someone would come charging out, shooting at us, and a Marine would kill them, and we'd go back to work. And he wouldn't talk about it. Now, a few years after he returns, his mother dies, very young, of lung cancer. And my father, with all his heart, wants to say Kaddish. But he can't, because he doesn't believe or think about God that way.
In that way.
Prayer is not going to work for him. He knows what shelf his tefillin are on. It just doesn't feel right. An older friend of his, actually a dear, dear friend whose family stayed in our life for a long time, named Irving Robin, also one of the founders of Camp Ramah, Wisconsin, said to him, I really think you should go and talk to the rabbi at Anshe Emet in Chicago. And my father said, Irving, I love you. I don't want to talk to rabbis. He said, no, really, Seymour. This rabbi is not like any other rabbi. Go and talk to him. I promise you. You can say anything to him and he won't be offended. My father goes to the morning minyan and he sits in the back and he puts on his tefillin and he says Kaddish, but he can't talk to the rabbi and it feels silly. His friend calls him, did you go? I went. Did you talk to the rabbi? No, I couldn't. Go back. All right, I'll go back. This goes on 3 or 4 times. My father cannot bring himself. He had enormous respect for rabbis. He would come and he'd be in our home, and my friends, right? Also, he would only refer to him as rabbi. It's really Mr. Hirschfield. You don't have to do that. Finally, Rabbi Eisenstein, at the end of davening that morning, comes back to him and says, I'd like to introduce myself. And I'm told he wasn't the warmest character in the world, so this was a big deal. Turns out Irving had called him and said, you should go find this tall young man in the back. My name is Ira Eisenstein. I'm the rabbi here. Can I help you? I see you're coming around. If I said, Rabbi, no, probably not a good idea. He goes, why? He goes, well, I think if I started to tell you what I think about being here, you'd be very offended, and I don't want to offend you. And Ira looked at him and said, well, at least tell me your name. He goes, my name is Seymour. Seymour, let me tell you something. For the next 5 minutes, you can say anything you want. I really don't care, and I promise I will not be offended. After that, maybe I will be, but 5 minutes, give me what you got. And he says, look, my mother died. I want to say Kaddish. I don't believe most of these words. I opened the Bible, and it's a beautiful story, but I don't think there's a God that way. There's certainly no God to pray to. I watched that God disappear in the South Pacific. That's not how I work. The idea that someone is intervening on anyone's behalf, I don't buy. The idea that there was a voice on Mount Sinai that commanded Moses, it's a fairy tale to me. I'm very proud of being Jewish, but I can't. I can't. Eisenhower goes and said, Seymour, can I tell you something? He goes, sure. He goes, I don't believe any of that stuff either, and I'm the rabbi here. And that began a profound relationship and my father's re-engagement with Jewish. So much so that Ira eventually got fired at Anshe Emet because he was considered a heretic and was unable to perform my parents' wedding. But their honeymoon, they went to New York. And among the things they had to do was go to the Society for the Advancement of Judaism and visit my father's Rebbe, Ira Eisenstein. And so, again, there is no one thing that defines Jewish. No one way of being Jewish, no one way of thinking about God. I think what you said, Mark, is so profound, though. If we could help rabbis believe in themselves more, not criticize them, but remind them that they, of all people, have more to offer and more inside. I think rabbis are the least understood. And if they would give themselves permission to be themselves, they would actually help other Jews to be themselves. And actually, Torah is a remarkably useful thing in becoming who you want to be. But that means rather than criticizing rabbis and screaming, if you don't get more members or raise more money, you're failing, say to them, no, don't think about it that way. Don't be driven by the demography. Be driven by what's in your guts, what's in your neshama, in your soul, in your mind. You share that lovingly. History will take care of the rest.
So there's so much, it turns out, that connects the two of us. So Ira Eisenstein comes to New York. He marries Mordechai Kaplan's daughter.
Yeah.
He becomes a rabbi at the SAJ. And then he ultimately succeeds Mordechai Kaplan when Mordechai Kaplan retires. And Ira Eisenstein has an office on the second floor of the SAJ, and outside of his office sits his secretary, my mother.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm playing under the desk outside Ira's office.
I love it.
My grandfather, Jacob Golub, is a colleague of Mordechai Kaplan who helps him found the Reconstructionist movement and is on the first editorial board of the Reconstructionist magazine. And I become bar mitzvah at the SAJ. My brother becomes bar mitzvah at the SAJ. By the way, I grow up in a mainstream conservative household in Connecticut, but my family's roots are at the SAJ, while across the from 86th to 79th, there's an Orthodox shul, the Karlbach shul.
Yeah.
That's where my other grandparents go. So I'm being brought up at a Karlbach shul, the SAJ, living in a conservative household, and then become a Reform rabbi.
Right.
And when you say there's no one way of being Jewish, I don't know how you got it. You got it somehow.
I was given it. You were given it.
But I was, yes, nothing I did.
We were
Nothing I
lucky,
did.
we were
We were
blessed, call
lucky.
whatever words you want.
Exactly.
But we're proof that if we would stop worrying about outcomes and simply create beautiful inputs, beautiful Orthodox inputs, beautiful radical Reconstructionist inputs, really, if we would give people those inputs and not worry about the outcomes, we would be remarkably healthy, right? The metaphor I often give is that we have turned an art into a technology.
And it's art, isn't it?
Jewing is an art form.
Yes.
And we all know there are two ways to approach art. The way I fear too often it's presented to us is Venus paint by number kits. Remember those? Right, we're probably dating ourselves here, but okay. For those who don't remember, you opened the box that you got at the toy store, and there was a canvas, and it was all sectored out with numbers, and then there was a group of colors, and you were to dip your paint in the appropriate number, and you would fill in the boxes. Now, by the way, that gets a lot of people to paint, but it doesn't train anyone to be an artist. To be an artist, what you have to do is give people palettes with as much paint on them as possible, and safe spaces and plenty of canvas, and tell them to have at it. Now, by the way, no paint, no tradition, no canvas, no framework, no safe space, no community, no teachers, no rabbis, you're not going to do it. But none of those are meant to control what each aspiring artist paints. Will they paint a lot of junk? Yeah, of course they will. That's called history. It's full of all kinds of failed experiments. But we will raise up a generation of artists. Now imagine raising up a generation of Jew artists, right? People who knew the art of being Jewish. They'll paint in all kinds of different ways, and the galleries will have to segment it. This is an impressionist, and this is a modernist, and this, right? Great. But no one questions those are all forms of fine art. And they're fine art that needed two things: great traditions as inputs, and the passion of each individual. And the outcomes will be what they will be.
Now I want to go to step 2.
Okay.
You end up in Israel.
Yeah.
Not only do you end up in Israel, you end up on the West Bank.
Yeah.
You end up out in Hebron.
Yeah.
And it sounds like for a period of time in your life, you were leaning to the right.
Let's put it this way. The only place I wasn't, right, where I drew the line is, after the first year in Israel, I stopped working for Meir Kahana. That was a little too far for me. And by the way, only because one night sitting in his home in Jerusalem, he was wearing not one but 2 weapons. I looked at him afterwards and said, Rebbe, that's what I called him. We're here, in Yerushalayim, free Jewish people. What's with the 2 guns? Right? We have an army. This is ours. We're home. He looked at me and said, Brad, you never know. And that's for me when I drew that line. Because I realized for all of the talk, he actually didn't believe in the reality of a Jewish state. He didn't really believe in the power of our own army. What he had done was he had married 2,000 years of diasporist suspicion to contemporary Jewish access to weapons. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't have his good days, and relative to the Soviet Jewry movement, he did.
Awful lot good about him.
Yeah, I said, and relative to the
And
Soviet Jewry movement and all that.
He was a very good soul, and the Jewish world maligned him often.
It's like everyone else.
Yes.
The idea that it's all good or all bad is almost
Right.
always a mistake.
Right.
But I realized that was too much for me.
That's interesting.
But
Okay.
short of that, no. I was in Hebron, happily so. When I first
But
got there.
Explain to us how that happens.
So I guess
Here you are, this kid
I was
from
17 years
You're
old.
from Chicago.
Yeah.
You brought up, and you've already said you've moved towards tradition.
Yeah, I chose to go to an Orthodox high school. And it was a co-ed modern Orthodox high school.
In Chicago?
In Chicago, the Ida Crown Jewish Academy.
All right.
And I'm sure people will go, Academy? He really is a Chicagoan? I think that's how the word is said. My own daughters would disagree. And I knew that I was looking for something even much more intense than that, and I saw my future in Israel and had racked up a lot of credits and good grades and blah, 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 and said to the school, I'm leaving early. I'm graduating early. They go, well, we don't really have that. You figure out how to make it happen.
Okay.
I need to be in Israel.
And how did your parents feel about you going to Israel?
They were both deeply proud and deeply terrified, but they were deeply proud.
Roughly what year are we talking about?
This was in 81.
In 81.
Yeah. And they were very proud. They were deeply supportive. Now, part of the reason they were supportive is because, without using that metaphor, they did believe in an artistic approach. Whatever I wanted to do that would deepen Jewish, they were going to support, pretty much. They were also passionate Zionists. I mean, you have to remember, I grew up much more aware of AIPAC and Jewish Federation and Israel missions than I did of what went on in the synagogue, except for 2 or 3 days a year. So there was a piece of them that was actually quite proud of this, and my mother's political leanings were actually profoundly right-wing. So what scared her, in fact, the irony is that now she thinks I've gone wrong, but leave that there. They were scared because now the ideology was going to get real. Even though my initial plans, I'm going to yeshiva, I'm not going into the army, I was too young, I was 17, that was where they were. So they were supportive.
Okay, you go to Israel.
So I go to Israel very quickly.
On your own?
Well, so it's a framework and a context through a combination of the Jewish Agency, the Sochnut, and Yeshiva University.
Okay, and you go to study
And I go to
where?
Yeshiva at a place called Beit Midrash LeTorah, and it was part of it was a YU program for students to finish high school in Israel.
Okay, where was it located?
In Jerusalem.
Okay.
In Jerusalem.
How do you end up at Hebron?
Because I was looking. Right? So first when I got to Israel, because I'd been in JDL in Chicago, I connected with Rabbi Kahana.
Aha, I didn't hear that part before.
Yeah.
You were with JDL, the Jewish Defense League
Yeah.
of Meir Kahana.
Yeah.
Started in New York, but then there were branches all
Yeah.
over the country.
Yeah.
Had you met him in America?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know him well, but I had met him.
Okay.
And so I sought him out, but I also very quickly connected with a teacher in our yeshiva, a guy named Yankele Levine, who was an activist in Gush Emunim in the settlement community. He was kind of Ariel Sharon's fixer, especially in the religious community. And someone said, you'll like Yankele, you should go meet him. And we met, and I was like, I was ripe for the picking. He said, you have to go to Hebron, which I didn't need to be convinced. So he sets me up for a Shabbat that I spent in Hebron. Then, that was 60...
With whom?
With Rabbi Levinger and his wife Miriam Levinger, the
Aha.
founder of the community,
Yes.
who just died this year, by the way. And with all of my differences, I still felt a loss, because again, it's not all or nothing. There was almost nothing by the end I agreed with him about, but there was also a greatness there that shouldn't be overlooked. And I was hooked. I was absolutely captivated, and this is where I wanted to be. And not only for political reasons, but remember, all of this approach, and I get it, hardcore, right-wing, we're 60 Jews among 60,000 Palestinians, and I want to be honest, and I'm not proud to say it, barely saw them as fully human, because we believed God was on our side. And at that age, that is how I thought. I didn't realize that if there's a God, then God is on all sides. Doesn't mean all sides are equally right, but it means that an infinite God is on all sides. Then you got to figure out how to translate that into our finite reality, because they're not all equally right positions, but we are all equally human. That's for sure. Not so much then. But I was captivated, and it also worked because, remember, all of this is animated by the teachings of Rabbi Kook. Rabbi Kook the Elder, Abraham Isaac HaKohen Kook, the first chief rabbi of the Jewish community of Palestine. I say Palestine, not a political statement. In the 20s, that's what it was when he took the job. By the way, despite all the protest of his rabbinic colleagues, because you're going to go work with those Jews, a bunch of communists? And he said, yes, I'm proud to. Right? They dumped garbage at his doorstep, and worse, at his home in Tel Aviv. And then his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who at the time was the spiritual leader and at the epicenter of the settlement community. And in his teachings, among the things I found that were moving was, wow, there is really a place for every Jew. We may not agree with all of them, but that guy who goes out for pork on Friday night, forget Friday, on Yom Kippur, he could actually be the gunner in your tank. We are in this together. And we're going to have to figure out whether we're American or Russian immigrants, or whether we're fifth-generation Jerusalemites, whether we're Ashkenazic or Sephardic, kosher eating or not kosher eating, praying or not praying, right-wing or left-wing, we are in this together. And I said, oh my God, this is a whole approach to building the state that understands what my parents were always trying to teach me. We are in this together, not despite our differences, with our differences. And the differences can be real and profound, but we're in this together. So I was in. And over time, I spent more and more time in Hebron and more time actually organizing groups of American yeshiva students to come visit in Hebron.
At that time, you also thought there's no reason why the entire West Bank shouldn't be part of Israel.
No, it was a part of Israel. My only question was when the East Bank would become part of Israel, right? Because there's still 2.5 tribes, according to the Bible, that lived over there. So the only issue is when we'll actually assert authority on that side.
Which, of course, is Jordan.
Yeah,
Yes,
right,
I
yes,
understand.
which is Jordan.
That was your perspective.
Yeah, as far as I was concerned, I had both a roadmap for history and, more importantly, a roadmap to the future. It was called the Hebrew Bible. And that was how I would lead tours, with a Tanakh, with a Bible in one hand and a Kalashnikov in the other. And I would take people through, we would show them the mezuzah niches that existed in Jewish homes in Hebron. Because again, as wrong as I was, I want to be very, very high. As much as I believe there is no future for us as Jews in Hebron, I also believe the people to whom we will turn it over will do all the things, if they could, to us that are what I don't want to do to them. So we should be very clear. This isn't about moral equivalence. It's about being who we want to be. And we should never pretend that in 1929 Jews were not massacred simply because they were Jewish in Hebron. And we should not pretend that the idea that my kids will get to continue to visit the cave of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the Machpelah, when that, and I do think when that, reverts to full Palestinian control and that somehow they're going to say, oh yeah, come visit. That's not going to happen. And that's heartbreaking. Right? If you ask me what I think about Hebron now, it's very simple. The people who know that we need to go actually won't weep over leaving. And the people who would weep over leaving will fight to the death to stay. And that's a bad place to be, because the only way we can leave is if we understand we've got to do it crying and with open eyes, knowing why we're doing it, and not because suddenly the birds will chirp and everything will be perfect and it'll all be great. Right? That's not going to happen. But those days I was not there. The only issue is, can we get enough people here fast enough and arm them well enough that eventually will be 60,000 and we'll drive them out. That was what I thought. And I thought, because someone said, why? Because God said so. And I want to tell you, I think I would still be there to this day. Were it not that in '83, with the emergence of the Jewish underground movement and witnessing my own teachers and officers being willing to subvert our own government and themselves do things, including murdering innocent civilians, that shook me up so much that I felt, this is not what we are here for. Is this a Jewish city? Even as I was leaving, I felt, yes, this is a Jewish city. But it may be that the issue isn't, is it a Jewish city or do we have a legitimate claim? The issue is, what price are we paying morally, ethically, and spiritually for asserting our authentic rights? Right? Because the issue isn't about who's right and who's wrong in my mind. I remain and always will be a proud religious Zionist. The issue is to know, how much is that delicious meal you're eating really going to cost?
Are you still suggesting that the claim that you want to promote is that God gave the land to the Jewish people?
I mean, unqualified, it's hard for me to say yes. Do I believe that? Yeah, I do believe that. I believe Israel's our homeland. But I believe that lots of people have lots of understandings of what God gave them, and trying to create the future by fighting about theology from the past is not going to work. So I'm all for believing whatever people want to believe, but then ask again, what is the price? What does it cost? For me, it's much simpler. If you believe that people have a right to be home, and that has been a Jewish home for thousands of years, the idea that the only way to make peace is to self-exile or kill ourselves is crazy. So I tell people all the time, the same reason that I believe in the dignity of the claim there should be an independent Palestine is why I will fight to the end for there to be a viable Jewish democratic state of Israel. And anyone who suggests that that's an unacceptable alternative, well, I would say if you want to kill yourself, it's tragic, but you should, you can go and do that, but don't kill me so you'll feel better, right? And that's part of the issue. So the claims about God, not God, aren't helpful. If you ask me, has it been a home to and for Jews from the very beginning? Yes. But my love of Israel in the end is not so much because of the past, although that's clearly a piece of it. And it's not because I think one day, even here in America, they will come for us. And so we need some kind of escape pod. It's because for me, Israel, at its best, and there's a lot that's best there, is for us in the 21st century exactly why I believe Solomon and his son, his father, King David, built it up. It was a place to create a great Jewish society. And I believe we have that to do. And to fight about lines on a map is less important to me than asking, how will we as a Jewish people create a great Jewish society in whatever parameters turn out to be? An authentically Jewish, genuinely democratic, truly humanitarian state.
Just wonderful. We're going to have to pause.
Okay.
And you'll get to drink some more water. And then we'll continue with part 2. You've been hearing my meeting with Brad Hirschfield. He's the president of CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. But as you can tell from our discussion, and we've only scratched the surface, he's a remarkable human being. And as I said to you in the open, there are some Jews who are able to shed light where there's not enough light and inspire Jewish commitment and Jewish passion. And Brad Hirschfield is one of those rare individuals. He is not unique, but he is rare. And to have him here and for you to let me, sort of probe you the way I do and push you the way I do is very, very sweet of you. It's wonderful having you. We're going to continue in a moment.
Great.
If there's anything you want me to know about anything you've heard Brad say on this edition of L'chaim, please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.